The rain poured down on the Boston streets as Sophie Martinez stumbled through the darkness, her worn backpack digging into her shoulders. Every step away from the brownstone where she had spent the last 24 years felt like both liberation and terror. Behind her, the life she knew crumbled into memory. Ahead, nothing but uncertainty stretched into the night. Sophie pulled her thin jacket tighter against the October chill. Inside her backpack, everything she owned in the world barely filled the small space. $300 in crumpled bills, a few changes of clothes, her mother's silver locket, and a battered journal filled with musical compositions. It was pathetic, really. How little remained of a life once filled with promise. Her stepmother Diane's words still echoed in her mind like poison. "You're worthless without me, Sophie. Your father left you nothing. You have no skills, no future, no value. Where will you go? Who will want you?" Sophie had wanted to scream that she had value, that she was talented, that her mother had believed in her dreams of becoming a concert pianist. But years of Diane's cruelty had worn down her confidence, until she almost believed the venomous words herself. Almost the truth was Sophie's father had loved her once. Before the cancer took him 6 months ago, he had been her champion, encouraging her music, supporting her ambitions. But in his grief after losing Sophie's mother, when Sophie was 15, he had married Diane too quickly, desperate for companionship. The woman had seemed charming at first, but her true nature emerged the moment the wedding ended. For 9 years, Diane had systematically destroyed everything Sophie held dear. First, she convinced Sophie's father that music lessons were too expensive. Then she sold Sophie's beloved baby grand piano, claiming they needed money for household expenses. She isolated Sophie from friends, monitored her every move, and made her feel like a burden in her own home. After her father died, things became unbearable. Diane announced she was selling the house and moving to Florida with her sister. Sophie, she declared, would be sent to live with her father's bitter cousin, Margaret, a woman who had made it clear she viewed Sophie as an unwelcome obligation. That night, Sophie had made her choice. She would rather face the unknown streets than another prison disguised as family. Lost in thought, Sophie didn't notice the traffic light had changed. She stepped off the curb into the crosswalk, her mind 1,000 miles away from the present moment. The screech of brakes shattered her reverie. Sophie turned her head just in time to see the sleek black Mercedes sliding toward her on the rain-slicked street. She tried to jump back, but her foot caught on the curb. The car's bumper barely touched her hip, but the shock sent her tumbling backward. Her backpack flew open, scattering her meager possessions across the wet pavement. The driver's door burst open immediately. A man emerged, tall and commanding, even in the downpour. He wore an expensive charcoal suit that was quickly being ruined by the rain, but he didn't seem to notice. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and his gray eyes held a mixture of concern and relief as he rushed toward her.
"Are you hurt?"
"Don't move. I'm calling an ambulance." His voice was deep, authoritative, the kind of voice accustomed to being obeyed. "Oh, please. I'm fine." Sophie scrambled to gather her scattered belongings, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. The rain had soaked through her jacket, and she was shivering uncontrollably. It was my fault. I wasn't paying attention. The man knelt beside her, helping collect her things, despite the rain and the ruined suit. His hands paused when he picked up her journal, and Sophie saw him glance at the musical notations before carefully closing it and handing it to her. "You're a musician?" he asked, his tone gentler now. I want to be. "It's complicated." Sophie stuffed everything back into her backpack, avoiding his penetrating gaze. Up close, she could see he was probably in his late 30s, with a strong jawline and an intensity that was both intimidating and magnetic. "Let me at least drive you somewhere. You're soaked, and you're shaking. Where do you live?" "I don't." The words escaped before Sophie could stop them. She bit her lip, cursing her honesty. I'm between places right now. I'll find a shelter or something." "Really, I'm fine. Thank you for your concern." She tried to stand, but her legs were shaking from a combination of adrenaline, cold, and exhaustion. She'd been walking for hours before the accident, and her body was finally giving out. The man caught her elbow, steadying her. You're not fine. And I'm not letting you wander the streets in this condition. He studied her face, and Sophie saw something shift in his expression. Recognition of something, though they had never met. My name is Julian Blackwood. I have a penthouse apartment 3 blocks from here. You can get warm, dry off, and we can figure out your next step. No strings attached. Sophie should have refused. Every instinct screamed that accepting help from a strange man was dangerous, foolish, potentially disastrous. But something in Julian Blackwood's gray eyes held genuine concern, not predatory intent. And the alternative was wandering the rainy streets until she collapsed from hypothermia. Sophie Martinez, she whispered, and I don't have anywhere else to go. Julian's expression softened further. Then let's get you out of this rain. His penthouse was everything Sophie expected from a man who drove a Mercedes and wore custom-tailored suits. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Boston skyline, now blurred by rain and fog. Modern furniture and shades of gray and black gave the space a sophisticated but cold atmosphere. Everything looked expensive and untouched, as if no one actually lived there. The guest room is down that hall, second door on the right, Julian said, shrugging out of his ruined jacket. There should be towels in the bathroom. I'll find you some dry clothes, though they'll be too large. We can figure out something more permanent in the morning. Sophie asked, still standing near the entrance, dripping water onto the pristine hardwood floors. You don't know me. I could be anyone. Julian turned to face her fully, and for a moment, Sophie saw past the confident exterior to something wounded beneath. Because someone helped me once when I had nothing? Because you remind me that not everyone has a safety net. And because... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Because leaving you on the street would haunt me. 30 minutes later, Sophie emerged from the guest room wearing Julian's oversized Yale sweatshirt and sweatpants, her damp hair wrapped in a towel. She found him in the kitchen, heating soup on a state-of-the-art stove. Sit, he commanded gently, gesturing to the bar stools at the marble island. When did you last eat? Sophie had to think about it. Yesterday morning, I think. Maybe the morning before that. Julian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, simply ladling soup into a bowl and placing it before her with a spoon. As Sophie ate, he prepared a second bowl for himself and sat across from her. So, Sophie Martinez, who doesn't have anywhere to go, he said quietly. What's your story? Something about his tone, about the warmth of the soup in her belly, and the safety of being inside while rain lashed the windows, loosened Sophie's tongue. She found herself telling him everything. Her mother's death, her father's remarriage, Diane's cruelty, the years of having her dreams systematically destroyed, her father's death, and finally her escape. Julian listened without interrupting, his gray eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. I lost my mother when I was 20, he finally said. Cancer, like your father. She was a pianist too. Not professionally, but she played beautifully. After she died, I couldn't bear to hear piano music for years. It felt like losing her all over again. Sophie looked at him with new understanding. Is that why you stopped to help me? Because of my journal? Maybe partly, Julian admitted. But also because I see someone who's been broken by circumstances beyond her control, yet still carrying her dreams with her. That takes strength, Sophie. More strength than you probably realize you have. Their eyes met across the kitchen island, and something electric passed between them. Sophie felt her breath catch, suddenly aware of how intimate this moment was. Sitting in a stranger's kitchen wearing his clothes, sharing their deepest sorrows, Julian seemed to feel it too. He stood abruptly, clearing their bowls. You should rest. Tomorrow, we can discuss your options. I have connections in the music world. I might be able to help you find work, a place to stay, something. Why would you do that for me? Sophie asked, standing as well. You really don't know me. Julian turned from the sink, and the vulnerability in his expression took her breath away. Because maybe helping you will help me remember how to be human again. I've spent so long building walls, protecting myself, that I forgot what it feels like to simply care about someone without calculation. Before Sophie could respond, Julian's phone buzzed urgently. He glanced at the screen, and his expression hardened instantly, the vulnerable man disappearing behind a mask of cold professionalism. I have to take this, he said curtly. Emergency business. The guest room is yours for as long as you need it. We'll talk more in the morning. He strode toward his study, already speaking in clipped tones to whoever was on the other end. Sophie stood alone in the kitchen, feeling the absence of his presence like a physical thing. She made her way to the guest room, which was larger than her entire bedroom at Diane's house had been. As she climbed into the impossibly soft bed, Sophie replayed the evening in her mind. The accident, Julian's inexplicable kindness, the connection she felt despite knowing him for mere hours. It was crazy. She should be terrified, planning her escape in the morning. Instead, for the first time in years, Sophie felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope in his study. Julian ended his call and stood at the window, staring out at the rain-soaked city. His reflection in the glass showed a man torn between desire and duty, between protecting himself and taking a risk on something unexpected. He thought about Sophie's green eyes, so full of pain and determination, about her music, which he had glimpsed in her journal, about the way she had looked at him with understanding when he mentioned his mother. This was dangerous. He knew that. He had sworn off emotional entanglements after Rebecca had destroyed his ability to trust. But something about Sophie Martinez felt different, genuine. Real Julian pressed his palm against the cold glass, making a decision that would change both their lives forever. Tomorrow, he would help her. He would give her space to heal, to grow, to rediscover her music. And maybe, just maybe, in saving her, he would find a way to save himself. 2. Sophie woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of fresh coffee. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the previous night came rushing back, and she sat up quickly, her heart racing. Julian Blackwood. The accident. The penthouse. Everything felt like a fever dream, too surreal to be real. She found Julian in the kitchen, dressed in a crisp navy suit, reading something on his tablet while sipping espresso. He looked up when she entered, and his expression softened in a way that made her stomach flutter. Good morning. I hope you slept well, he gestured to the coffee maker. Help yourself. I also had my housekeeper pick up some clothes for you. They're in the guest room closet. I guessed your size, so hopefully they fit. Sophie stared at him. You bought me clothes? Borrowed, technically, until you can shop for yourself. Julian set down his tablet. Sophie, I have a proposition for you. My personal assistant quit last week, and I need someone organized, trustworthy, and discreet. The job pays well, includes health insurance, and you could live here until you find your own place. You'd be earning your keep, not accepting charity. I don't have any experience as an assistant, Sophie protested, though her heart was already leaping at the possibility. But you have a college degree in music theory, which means you can organize, schedule, and handle complex information. You're intelligent and articulate. The rest I can teach you. Julian's gray eyes held hers steadily. I'm offering you a chance, Sophie. Not a handout. Right. A job. What you do with it is up to you. Sophie felt tears prickling her eyes. Why are you being so kind to me? Because kindness shouldn't be so rare that it requires explanation, Julian said simply. So do you accept? Yes. The word came out as a whisper. Yes, thank you. Over the next 2 weeks, Sophie threw herself into her new role with determination. Julian was demanding but fair, expecting excellence, but providing the tools to achieve it. She managed his schedule, screened his calls, organized his files, and slowly began to understand the empire he had built. Julian Blackwood was the founder and CEO of Blackwood Technologies, a software company that had revolutionized data security. At 38, he was worth billions, commanded respect in boardrooms worldwide, and maintained a reputation for brilliance and ruthlessness in equal measure. But Sophie was beginning to see beneath that polished exterior. She noticed how he never raised his voice at employees, how he remembered small details about their lives, how he donated anonymously to music programs for underprivileged children. He worked 16-hour days, not out of greed, but out of a driving need to prove himself worthy of his success, and he was lonely. desperately, achingly lonely in his glass tower. Their evenings fell into a comfortable routine. After work, they would share dinner and conversation. Julian asked about her music, encouraging her to use the baby grand piano in his rarely used formal living room. The first time Sophie played for him, she chose Chopin, and watched his eyes close with an expression of such profound emotion that she nearly stopped. When the final notes faded, Julian opened his eyes, and she saw they were bright with unshed tears. "My mother used to play that piece," he said quietly. "I haven't heard it in 18 years. Thank you for giving that back to me." Something shifted between them that night. The boundaries of employer and employee began to blur into something deeper, more complicated. Sophie caught herself watching him when he wasn't looking, noticing the strength in his hands, the intelligence in his eyes, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. And Julian, though he tried to maintain professional distance, found himself drawn to Sophie in ways that both thrilled and terrified him. Her laugh, her passion for music, her resilience in the face of hardship. Everything about her called to the parts of himself he had locked away after Rebecca's betrayal. 3 weeks after Sophie started working for Julian, everything changed. Sophie returned from lunch to find an elegantly dressed woman waiting in Julian's office. She was stunning, with platinum blonde hair, ice blue eyes, and a designer dress that probably cost more than Sophie made in a month. "You must be the new assistant," the woman said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I'm Rebecca Sterling, Julian's fiancée. Well, former fiancée, but these things are so fluid, aren't they?" Sophie felt her stomach drop. "Mr. Blackwood didn't mention he was expecting you." "Julian and I don't need appointments, darling. We have history." Rebecca's smile was predatory. 3 years ago, we were planning our wedding. I made a mistake. He overreacted, but now I'm ready to make amends. True love always finds its way back, don't you think? Before Sophie could respond, Julian emerged from the conference room, and his expression went cold when he saw Rebecca. "What are you doing here?" His voice could have frozen water. "I wanted to see you, to talk about us." Rebecca moved toward him with practiced grace. "Julian, it's been 3 years. Surely you can forgive me now. What we had was special. What we had was a lie." Julian's jaw was tight. "You slept with my business partner while wearing my engagement ring. There is no us, Rebecca. There never will be again. Don't be dramatic. It was one mistake. You've punished me long enough." Rebecca's eyes flickered to Sophie with calculation. "Or have you already replaced me with the help?" How deliciously predictable. "Get out," Julian said quietly, but with such intensity that Sophie took a step back. Now, Rebecca's perfect facade cracked slightly. "You'll regret this, Julian. I know things about you, about your patterns. How you rescue broken birds and discard them when they heal. Ask your new pet about the 3 women before her. Ask her if she's truly special or just another project." After Rebecca left, the office felt poisoned. Julian stood with his back to Sophie, his shoulders rigid with tension. "Is it true?" Sophie asked quietly. "Have there been others like me?" Julian turned, and the pain in his eyes made her chest ache. "There have been women I helped, yes. After Rebecca, I threw myself into work and philanthropy. I funded scholarships, helped employees in crisis, donated to causes. Some of those people were women who needed assistance. But you," he stepped closer, "you are not a project, Sophie. He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. Sophie felt tears building. "I'm what?" "You're the first person in 3 years who has made me want to feel again," Julian said softly. "Who has made me believe that maybe I could trust someone with more than just professional respect. That terrifies me because I don't know if I'm strong enough to survive being wrong again." Sophie wanted to close the distance between them, to tell him she felt the same terrifying pull. But Rebecca's words echoed in her mind. Rescue broken birds and discard them. Was that what this was? Was she fooling herself into believing there could be something real between a billionaire and a homeless girl he had literally hit with his car? That night, Sophie couldn't sleep. She kept replaying Rebecca's words, examining every interaction with Julian through a new, darker lens. Had his kindness been genuine, Or was she just the latest charity case that made him feel better about himself? Around midnight, she heard the piano. Julian was playing in the formal living room, and the melody was heartbreaking, full of longing and regret. Sophie found herself walking toward the sound. Drawn by a force she couldn't resist, Julian sat at the piano in the darkness, illuminated only by the city lights through the windows. His fingers moved over the keys with surprising skill, playing a piece Sophie recognized as one of his mother's favorites. "I didn't know you could play," she said softly from the doorway. Julian's hands stilled. "My mother taught me. After she died, I stopped. Until you came here and filled this place with music again." Sophie entered the room slowly. "Julian, I need to know the truth. Am I just another woman you're trying to save?" He turned to face her fully, and the vulnerability in his expression took her breath away. "Come here," Sophie approached until she stood beside the piano bench. Julian reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "I won't lie to you, Sophie. After Rebecca, I did throw myself into helping others because it was easier than dealing with my own pain. But you..." He pulled her down to sit beside him on the bench. "From the moment I saw you in the rain, something was different. It wasn't just wanting to help. It was wanting to know you, to hear your story, to be near you." "Rebecca said you discard women when they heal," Sophie whispered. "Rebecca doesn't know what she's talking about. The women I helped before found their own paths and moved on naturally. We parted as friends, not because I discarded them." Julian's thumb traced circles on her palm. "But with you, the thought of you leaving feels unbearable." "That's how I know this is different." Sophie searched his face. "I'm falling for you, Julian. And it scares me because we're from different worlds. You're a billionaire, and I'm nobody. You're not nobody." Julian's other hand cupped her cheek. "You're talented, resilient, kind. You're Sophie Martinez, who chose to chase her dreams rather than accept a prison. You're the woman who brought music back into my life, who made me remember how to smile, how to hope." "But what if Rebecca is right? What if you wake up one day and realize I was just a phase? Then I'll spend every day until then proving her wrong." Julian leaned closer, his breath warm against her lips. "Sophie, I haven't felt this way about anyone since before Rebecca destroyed my ability to trust. You've done something I didn't think was possible. You've made me want to try again." Sophie's resistance crumbled. She closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that felt like coming home. Julian responded immediately, his arms encircling her as the kiss deepened. Years of loneliness and pain melting away in the warmth of connection. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. Julian rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Not as my assistant, not as my charity case. Stay with me as the woman I'm falling in love with." Sophie's heart soared and shattered simultaneously. "I want to, but I need to know this is real. I need time to trust that I'm not just fooling myself." "Then take the time you need," Julian said, though the disappointment in his eyes was clear. "I'm not going anywhere." Not fate, it seemed, had other plans. 2 days later, Sophie was leaving Julian's building to pick up lunch when a familiar voice stopped her cold. Well, if it isn't little Sophie, playing dress-up in expensive clothes." Sophie turned to find Diane standing on the sidewalk, her expression twisted with malice. Her stepmother looked older, harder, the years of bitterness etched into every line of her face. "How did you find me?" Sophie asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Did you really think you could just disappear? I have friends in this city, people who owe me favors. When I heard you were working for Julian Blackwood, I couldn't believe my luck." Diane stepped closer, and Sophie caught the stale scent of cigarettes. "You owe me, Sophie. Your father would have wanted you to help support me in my retirement." "I owe you nothing," Sophie said firmly. "You sold everything my father left for me, including my mother's piano. You made my life miserable for 9 years. I'm done with you." Diane's eyes narrowed. "You think your rich boyfriend will protect you? Men like him don't stay with girls like you. You're a novelty, a plaything. When he's bored, you'll come crawling back to me and I won't be so forgiving. She won't be coming back to you ever." Both women turned to find Julian standing behind them, his expression arctic. Sophie had never seen him look so dangerous. "Mr. Blackwood, I presume," Diane said, attempting a smile. "I'm Sophie's stepmother. We were just having a family discussion." "You're nothing to Sophie but a bully and a thief," Julian said coldly. "And if you ever come near her again, if you so much as think about her, I will ensure that every detail of your life is examined by lawyers, so thoroughly that you'll wish you had never heard the name Sophie Martinez." "Do I make myself clear?" Diane paled. "You can't threaten me." That wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Julian moved to stand beside Sophie, his hand finding hers. "Leave now." After Diane scurried away, Sophie sagged against Julian, the encounter leaving her shaken. He held her close, his hand stroking her hair. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered against his chest. "Yes, I did. Nobody threatens what's mine." He pulled back to look at her face. "If you'll let me protect you, that is." Sophie looked up at him, seeing not just the powerful billionaire, but the wounded man who had also lost so much. Rebecca's poisonous words lost their power in the face of this moment, this choice. "I'm yours," she said simply. "And you're mine, if you'll have me." Julian's kiss was his answer, fierce and possessive and tender all at once. When they finally pulled apart, Sophie saw her future reflected in his gray eyes. It was uncertain, potentially complicated, but undeniably real. That evening they talked for hours, addressing every doubt and fear. Julian told her about his life after his mother's death, about building his company from nothing, about Rebecca's betrayal and the 3 years of emotional isolation that followed. Sophie shared her own fears about being enough, about belonging in his world, about losing herself in someone else's life. "I don't want you to lose yourself," Julian said as they sat together on the couch. Sophie curled against his side. "I want you to find yourself. Pursue your music. Build your own career. I'll support you however I can, but this isn't about you becoming part of my world. It's about us creating a world together." Sophie felt tears of relief and joy sliding down her cheeks. "I love you, Julian Blackwood." "I love you too, Sophie Martinez." He kissed her forehead. "And tomorrow, I'm going to prove it." But neither of them could have anticipated how Rebecca's encounter would set off a chain of events that test everything they had just promised each other. The next morning, Sophie woke in Julian's arms for the first time. Sunlight filtered through the curtains of his bedroom, casting golden patterns across the sheets. She studied his face in sleep. The hard lines softened, the vulnerability he rarely showed visible in the peaceful expression. Her heart swelled with love so intense it almost frightened her. Julian's eyes opened slowly, and when he saw her watching him, he smiled. "Good morning, beautiful." "Good morning," Sophie whispered, still marveling that this was real. Julian pulled her closer, kissing her softly. "I meant what I said last night. I'm going to prove how much you mean to me. Starting today." After breakfast, Julian led Sophie to his study and opened his laptop. "I've been doing research. There's a music conservatory in Boston that offers programs for adult students. They have a scholarship fund that I happen to donate to. I'd like you to audition." Sophie's breath caught. "Julian, I can't accept that. It would be using your influence." "The audition is yours to pass or fail on your own merit," Julian said firmly. "I'm simply making sure you have the opportunity. What you do with it depends entirely on your talent. And Sophie, you have extraordinary talent." Tears filled her eyes. "You really believe in me?" "It's more than you believe in yourself," he said, cupping her face. "But that's going to change." Over the next few weeks, Sophie threw herself into preparing for the audition. She practiced for hours each day, her confidence growing with each piece she mastered. Julian would sit and listen whenever he could, and sometimes she would catch him watching her with such profound love that it took her breath away. Their relationship deepened in ways that felt both natural and miraculous. Julian was attentive and passionate, but also respectful, giving Sophie space to grow into her own person. They talked about everything from philosophy to their favorite foods, learning each other's histories and dreams. But happiness, Sophie was learning, was often fragile. 3 weeks after her audition at the conservatory, where she had performed brilliantly and been accepted with a full scholarship, Sophie returned to the penthouse to find Rebecca Sterling sitting in the living room with Julian. The woman's presence felt like poison in their sanctuary. Sophie. Perfect timing, Rebecca said with false sweetness. Julian and I were just discussing some interesting information I've uncovered. Rebecca, get out, Julian said, his voice dangerous. Not until I share what I've learned. Rebecca turned her cold gaze to Sophie. Did you know that Julian has rescued exactly 5 women in the past 3 years? Each one was in a desperate situation. Each one he installed in this very penthouse. Each one he supported, educated, and then discarded once they no longer needed him. That's not true, Julian said, standing abruptly. You're twisting facts to suit your narrative. Am I? Rebecca smiled cruelly. Jennifer Thompson, struggling artist. He supported her for 6 months until she got a gallery showing. Then she mysteriously moved to California. Lauren Hayes, former employee with medical debt. He paid everything, then she transferred to his Seattle office. Chloe Brooks, recovering addict. He funded her rehabilitation, and now she works for a competitor. See a pattern? Sophie felt sick, but she forced herself to meet Julian's eyes. Is any of that true? Julian's jaw tightened. Yes, but not the way she's presenting it. Those women were employees and friends who needed help. We parted on good terms when they were ready to move forward with their lives. There was never anything romantic with any of them. Except Sophie is different, isn't she? Becca leaned forward. She's living in your bedroom, not just the guest room. She's the first one you've actually fallen for, which makes her the most dangerous. Because when she leaves, and they always leave Julian, it will destroy you completely. Get out of my home, Julian said, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. Now, before I call security, Rebecca stood gracefully. I'm leaving. But Sophie, darling, ask yourself this. When you're healed, when you're successful and independent, will he still want you? Or will he need someone new to rescue so he can feel like a hero? After Rebecca left, the silence was deafening. Sophie stood frozen, her mind racing. Julian approached her slowly, hands raised as if approaching a frightened animal. Sophie, please don't let her poison what we have. Did you help all those women? Sophie asked quietly.
Yes.
Yes, but they were completely different situations. There were no romantic feelings, no promises, nothing like what we have. Julian reached for her hands. Sophie, I love you. Only you. But she's right about one thing, Sophie said, tears spilling over. I was broken when you found me. You fixed me, gave me everything. And now, I'm accepted to the conservatory. I have money saved. I'm not the desperate girl you hit with your car. What happens when I don't need you anymore? You think I only love you because you needed me? Julian's voice cracked. Sophie, I fell in love with your strength, not your weakness. With your talent, your kindness, your spirit. Those things don't change whether you need my help or not. But doubt had taken root. Sophie pulled her hands away. I need time to think. I need to figure out who I am separate from you, separate from being someone you saved. Don't do this, Julian whispered, and Sophie saw tears in his eyes for the first time. Don't let her win. This isn't about her winning. It's about me knowing that what we have is real. Sophie's voice broke. I love you, Julian. But I need to prove to myself that I'm more than just another rescue project. How do I prove it to you? Julian asked desperately. Tell me what to do. You can't prove it. I have to discover it for myself. Sophie wiped her eyes. I'm going to stay with my friend Claire for a while, the one I reconnected with last week. I need space to breathe, to become who I'm meant to be. And then, Julian's voice was barely audible. And then, if what we have is real, we'll find our way back to each other. Sophie kissed him softly, tasting salt from both their tears. I love you. Please believe that. She packed a bag while Julian stood watching, his expression shattered. When she reached the door, she turned back one last time. Julian stood in the middle of his living room, looking more alone than she had ever seen him. It took everything in her not to run back to him. Goodbye, Julian, she whispered, and walked out. The next 4 weeks were the longest of Sophie's life. She threw herself into her studies at the conservatory, practicing until her fingers ached, taking theory classes and performance workshops. Claire, her college roommate, who had welcomed her without judgment, gave her space, but also support. Sophie excelled at the conservatory. Her professors praised her natural talent and emotional depth. She made friends with other students, joined a chamber music group, and slowly began to build an identity separate from being Julian Blackwood's girlfriend or charity case. But every night, she dreamed of him. Every song she played reminded her of the nights they spent at the piano together. She would catch herself reaching for her phone to call him, then stopping, knowing she needed to complete this journey alone. Julian, meanwhile, was falling apart. He stopped going to the office regularly, delegating responsibilities to his executives. He would sit at the piano for hours, playing the pieces Sophie loved, the house echoing with melancholy music. Marco, his loyal assistant, finally confronted him. "Sir, with all due respect, you need to fight for her. Grand gestures aren't your style, I know, but sometimes love requires us to be uncomfortable." She asked for space. Julian said hollowly, "I have to respect that." Respecting her wishes and giving up are two different things, Marco argued. She needs to see that you love her for who she is, not what she represents. So show her. That night, Julian made a decision. Began making calls, pulling strings, and putting a plan into motion that would either win Sophie back or prove to her that she was right to leave. On a Friday evening, for weeks after Sophie left, she received a mysterious invitation delivered to Claire's apartment. It was an embossed card inviting her to a special charity concert at Symphony Hall. The note that simply said, "Your presence would mean everything. You should go," Claire urged. "Even if it's not from Julian? It sounds amazing." Sophie's hands trembled as she held the invitation. Part of her knew exactly who had sent it. "What if I'm not ready? Are you happy without him?" Claire asked gently. Sophie thought about the past 4 weeks. She had grown tremendously, proven herself capable and talented. But there was an ache in her chest that never went away, a Julian-shaped hole that nothing else could fill. "No," she admitted. "I'm proud of myself, but I'm not happy." "Then maybe it's time to find out if you can be both," Claire said. Sophie wore a simple black dress she had bought with her own money from her conservatory stipend. She styled her hair in soft waves and wore her mother's silver locket. As she entered Symphony Hall, her heart pounded with anticipation and fear. The lobby was filled with Boston's elite, but an usher immediately approached her. "Ms. Martinez, please follow me." He led her not to a seat in the audience, but backstage. Sophie's confusion grew until she was ushered into a private room, where she found Julian. He looked thinner, tired, but his gray eyes lit up when he saw her. He wore a tuxedo that made him devastatingly handsome, and Sophie felt her resolve weakening immediately. "Thank you for coming," Julian said softly, not approaching her. "Wasn't sure you would." "What is this, Julian?" Sophie asked, her voice shaking. "This is me proving that I see you," he said. "Really see you. Sophie, I've spent the last month learning everything about your accomplishments at the conservatory. Your professors say you're one of the most talented students they've had in years. You've composed 3 original pieces. You're teaching piano to underprivileged children on weekends. You're building a life and career based on your own merit." Tears filled Sophie's eyes. "You've been keeping track of me?" "From a distance, with respect for your privacy," Julian said, "because I wanted to understand who you're becoming independent of me. And Sophie, the woman you're becoming is extraordinary. You always were, but now you believe it too." "Why am I here?" Sophie whispered. Julian took a deep breath. "Tonight's charity concert is to raise money for a new foundation I'm starting. It's called the Martinez Music Foundation. It will provide scholarships and instruments to talented students who can't afford music education. You're here because I want you to perform as the inaugural artist. Not because you're connected to me, but because you're the most talented pianist I know." Sophie's breath caught. "Julian, I can't." "Can," he said firmly. "There are 500 people out there who paid $1,000 a ticket just to attend. None of them know you're connected to me. You're here because I told them they would witness the debut of a remarkable new talent. Prove me right, Sophie. Not for me, but for yourself." "And after?" Sophie asked, tears streaming down her face. "What happens after?" Aunt Julian stepped closer, and Sophie could see he was fighting his own tears. "After, if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life loving you." Not as someone I rescued, but as an equal partner. As the woman who rescued me from a life of loneliness and fear. As my Sophie, who is brave and talented and strong enough to walk away when she needed to find herself. I love you, Sophie sobbed. I never stopped. Every day away from you hurt, but I had to know I could stand on my own. And now you know, Julian said, finally closing the distance between them and cupping her face. You can stand on your own. You just don't have to anymore. We can stand together. Their kiss was desperate and tender, filled with 4 weeks of longing and pain and love. When they pulled apart, Sophie was smiling through her tears. I'm terrified to perform in front of all those people, she admitted. I'll be in the front row, Julian promised. Sophie, whether you play perfectly or make 100 mistakes, I'll be proud of you. Because you're here, facing your fears, claiming your dream, that's all that matters. Sophie's performance that night was transcendent. She played 2 classical pieces flawlessly, then closed with one of her own compositions, a piece she had written about finding love in unexpected places. The audience gave her a standing ovation, and as she took her bow, she found Julian in the front row, tears streaming down his face, clapping harder than anyone else. After the concert, during the reception, Julian found her surrounded by admirers. Industry professionals offering opportunities and contacts. He hung back, letting her shine, until she caught his eye and excused herself. That was incredible, he said when she reached him. You were incredible. Thank you for giving me this chance, Sophie said, for believing in me even when I couldn't believe in myself. Julian took her hand. Sophie Martinez, I have one more thing to ask you tonight. To her shock, he lowered himself to one knee right there in the middle of the reception. The room went silent as everyone turned to watch. I know this is fast. I know we've only known each other for a few months. But Sophie, in that time, you've taught me how to feel again, how to hope, how to love without fear. He pulled a velvet box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a stunning diamond ring. I don't want to spend another day without you. Marry me. Be my partner, my equal, my everything. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that you're not a rescue project, but the love of my life. Sophie looked at the ring, then at Julian's face, and finally at the crowd of people watching with eager anticipation. 6 months ago, she had been homeless and hopeless. Now, she was a successful music student, a scholarship recipient, a performer, and most importantly, a woman who knew her own worth. Yes, she said clearly, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Yes, Julian Blackwood, I'll marry you. The room erupted in applause as Julian slid the ring onto her finger and stood, lifting her into his arms and spinning her around. Their kiss was witnessed by 500 strangers, would later say they had never seen 2 people more perfectly matched. 3 months later, on a perfect autumn day, Sophie Martinez became Sophie Blackwood in an intimate ceremony at Julian's estate. Instead of a traditional wedding march, they walked down the aisle together to a piano piece Sophie had composed, called Coming Home. Claire was her maid of honor. Marco was Julian's best man, and 50 close friends and family witnessed their vows. Sophie had insisted on reconciling with her father's cousin Margaret, who attended with tears in her eyes, apologizing for her coldness and embracing Sophie with genuine warmth. Even Diane had sent a card, though Sophie had chosen not to invite her. Some bridges, she decided, were better left burned. During the reception, Sophie and Julian performed a piano duet they had rehearsed in secret. As their fingers danced across the keys in perfect harmony, everyone in attendance understood that this was more than a marriage. It was the joining of 2 souls who had found in each other the missing pieces of themselves. 1 year later, Sophie stood in the music room of what was now called the Martinez Music Center, watching 15 children from underprivileged backgrounds receive free instruments and scholarship certificates. The center, funded by Julian but operated independently by Sophie and a board of music educators, had become her passion project. She was also 6 months pregnant with their first child, a fact that filled both her and Julian with joy and wonder. Julian appeared in the doorway. Watching his wife with an expression of pure love, Sophie caught his eye and smiled, the kind of smile that said everything words couldn't express. That evening, as they sat together at the piano in their home, Julian's hand resting on Sophie's growing belly, they played together the melody that had started it all. The one Sophie had composed her first night in his penthouse, when she had been broken and lost, and he had been lonely and afraid. "Do you ever regret it?" Sophie asked softly. "Taking in a homeless girl you literally hit with your car." Julian laughed, kissing her temple. "Best accident of my life, though I prefer to think of it as destiny giving us both a push in the right direction." "I love you, Julian Blackwood," Sophie said, leaning into his warmth. "I love you too, Sophie Blackwood," he replied. "My wife, my partner, my home, their daughter. When she was born 3 months later, would be named Aria, and she would grow up in a house filled with music and love. Learning from her parents that the most beautiful symphonies often begin with the most unexpected notes, Sophie never forgot where she came from, the rain-soaked streets, the fear, the desperation, but she also never forgot that sometimes, in our darkest moments, fate intervenes. Sometimes a wrong turn leads to exactly where we were meant to be all along. And sometimes, the person who saves you ends up being the person you save in return. The End Decalogue. 5 years later, the grand opening of the Sophie Blackwood Performing Arts Academy was attended by over 1,000 people. The state-of-the-art facility, built on the grounds of what had once been an abandoned warehouse in South Boston, now housed practice rooms, concert halls, and classrooms where disadvantaged youth could study music for free. Sophie, now 30 years old and recognized as one of Boston's most promising composers and philanthropists, stood at the podium with Julian beside her and their 2 children, Aria and Marcus, playing in the front row under Claire's watchful eye. "5 years ago," Sophie began, her voice steady and confident, "I was homeless, scared, and convinced that my dreams were dead. Today, I stand before you not to tell you that one person saved me, but to tell you that sometimes saving yourself requires accepting help when it's offered. This academy exists because I learned that lesson. We all need help sometimes, and we all have the power to help others." She looked at Julian, who smiled at her with the same love and pride he had shown from the beginning. "My husband taught me that kindness isn't weakness, that vulnerability is strength, and that real love doesn't diminish us. It multiplies us. This academy is our gift to the next generation of musicians who just need someone to believe in them." The applause was thunderous. As Sophie cut the ribbon and tours of the facility began, she found Julian's hand and squeezed it. "We did it," she whispered. "No, Julian," corrected gently. "You did it. I just had the privilege of watching you soar." And as Aria ran to them, dragging her little brother by the hand, both of them chattering excitedly about the pianos they had seen, Sophie realized that Rebecca had been wrong about everything. Julian didn't collect broken birds to fix them. He simply recognized that everyone deserves a chance to heal, to grow, to become who they were always meant to be. And in helping others find their wings, he had finally found his own. Sometimes the greatest love stories don't begin with love at first sight. Sometimes they begin with an accident, a moment of kindness, and 2 wounded souls brave enough to heal together. This was one of those stories, and it was far from over. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to hit like, share this story with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more meaningful stories. The Santa Monica Pier stretched out over the Pacific Ocean like a wooden finger pointing toward endless possibilities. Sophie Starling sat on her usual bench near the carousel, acoustic guitar resting comfortably against her body as if it were an extension of herself. The afternoon sun cast golden light across the weathered planks, and the salt air mixed with the scent of funnel cakes and popcorn from nearby vendors. This was her stage, her sanctuary, her way of keeping a promise she had made to her mother 3 years ago. Sophie's fingers moved across the strings with practiced ease, her voice rising above the ambient noise of tourists and seagulls. She sang an original song about finding light in the darkest moments, about trusting that tomorrow could be better than today. Her guitar case lay open at her feet, containing a modest collection of bills and coins from passers-by who stopped to listen. She never sang for the money, though she needed it. She sang because music was the language her soul spoke most fluently. The way she processed grief and transformed it into something beautiful. James Montgomery had been driving aimlessly for hours along the Pacific Coast Highway. His hands gripped the steering wheel of his black Tesla with unnecessary force, his knuckles white with tension. The funeral had ended that morning, but the emptiness inside him felt like it would never end. Emma, his 26-year-old sister, the only family he had left after their parents died in a plane crash 5 years ago, was gone. A drunk driver had stolen her life in an instant, leaving James alone in a world that suddenly felt too big and too empty. He was the founder and CEO of Montgomery Technologies, a company worth billions that specialized in artificial intelligence and machine learning. At 34, he had everything society told him should make him happy: wealth, success, influence, a penthouse overlooking the ocean. But none of it mattered now. Emma had been his anchor, the one person who saw him as just James, not the tech mogul or the billionaire. She had kept him grounded, made him laugh, reminded him that life was about more than quarterly earnings and stock prices. James parked his car without really knowing where he was and stepped out into the California sunshine that felt too bright for his mood. He walked toward the pier, his expensive Italian shoes making hollow sounds on the wooden planks. The sounds of laughter and music seemed obscene when his heart was breaking. But he kept walking, drawn forward by something he could not name. That was when he heard it. A voice, clear and achingly beautiful, singing words that seemed to reach inside his chest and touch the raw wound there. When the darkness feels too heavy and you cannot see the dawn, remember that the morning always comes to greet the sun. Hold on, just hold on, because love is stronger than the grave. James stopped walking. His breath caught in his throat. He turned toward the source of the voice and saw her, a young woman with auburn hair that caught the light like burnished copper, sitting on a bench with a guitar. She wore a simple yellow sundress and sandals, nothing designer or expensive. But she possessed a grace that money could not buy. Her eyes were closed as she sang, completely immersed in the music. And James found himself moving closer without conscious decision. He stood about 10 feet away, transfixed. The lyrics spoke directly to his pain, as if this stranger somehow knew exactly what he was feeling. Tears began to stream down his face, and for the first time since Emma died, he did not try to stop them. Other people walked past, some stopping to listen, some dropping money in the guitar case, but James could not move. He felt frozen in place by the power of this moment, by the inexplicable sense that he was exactly where he needed to be. When Sophie finished the song, she opened her eyes. Her gaze immediately found James, and something passed between them in that instant. Recognition, though they had never met. Connection, though they were strangers. She saw the tears on his face and the devastation in his eyes, and her expression softened with compassion. She did not look away, and neither did he. A small smile touched her lips, sad but genuine. She began playing another song, this one gentler, about finding peace in the midst of storms. James finally moved, walking slowly to an empty bench nearby. He sat down, not taking his eyes off her, and listened as she sang 3 more songs. Each one seemed to speak to a different part of his broken heart, offering comfort without demanding anything in return. When she paused to take a drink from her water bottle, James knew he had to say something, but words felt inadequate. What could he possibly say to explain what her music had just done for him? Sophie made the decision easier by standing up and walking over to him, her guitar hanging from a strap across her shoulder. "Hi," she said simply, her voice as warm in conversation as it was in song. "I noticed you've been crying. Are you okay?" James let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. "No," he admitted. "I'm really not okay. But your songs just gave me the first moment of peace I've felt in days." Sophie sat down on the bench beside him, leaving a respectful distance between them. From her backpack, she pulled out a small thermos and 2 paper cups. "I always bring extra," she explained, pouring what smelled like herbal tea into both cups. "Sometimes people need more than just music." James accepted the cup with trembling hands. "Thank you. I'm James." "Sophie," she replied. Sophie Starling. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping tea and watching the ocean. James found himself wanting to tell her everything, this stranger who somehow did not feel like a stranger at all. "I lost my sister 4 days ago," he said quietly. "Car accident. She was my only family." Sophie's eyes filled with tears of empathy. "I'm so sorry, James. Losing someone you love is like having part of your soul ripped away." She paused, then added, "I lost my mom to cancer 2 years ago. She was my best friend, my everything. Is that why you sing?" James asked. Sophie nodded. "She made me promise I'd keep singing no matter what. She always said that God gave me my voice to help heal people, including myself." She looked at James with those understanding eyes. "Sometimes the only way to survive the grief is to transform it into something that can help others." "Your mother was wise," James said, "and she was right about your voice. It's extraordinary." They talked until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Sophie told him about her childhood, about learning to play guitar from her father, about the small apartments she shared with 2 roommates in Venice Beach. James found himself opening up in ways he never did. Even with his closest business associates, he told her about Emma, about their childhood, about how success had never filled the empty spaces in his life. "Will you be here tomorrow?" James asked as Sophie began packing up her guitar. "I'm here every day from 2 to 6, Sophie replied. "Same bench, same songs, though I try to write new ones when inspiration strikes." "Then I'll see you tomorrow," James said with certainty. Sophie smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I'll be here." As James walked back to his car, he realized that for the first time since Emma died, he was thinking about tomorrow instead of drowning in yesterday. He did not understand what had just happened, but he knew that meeting Sophie Starling was not a coincidence. It felt like grace, like an answer to a prayer he had not known how to pray. That night, James slept better than he had in days. And when he woke up, his first thought was not of loss, but of the auburn-haired singer who had reminded him that hope still existed in the world. James returned to the pier the next day at exactly 2 o'clock. He had canceled 3 important meetings and ignored dozens of emails from his executive team, something he had never done before in his entire career. His assistant, Patricia, had called him twice to confirm he was all right, and he had simply told her he needed a few days. For the first time in his life, work felt secondary to something else, something he could not quite name yet, but desperately needed to pursue. Sophie was already there when he arrived. Tuning her guitar with careful attention, she looked up as he approached, and her face lit up with a smile that made his heart beat faster. "You came back," she said, and there was genuine happiness in her voice. "I told you I would," James replied, sitting on the bench he had occupied the day before. "I couldn't stay away." Over the next 2 weeks, this became their routine. James would arrive at the pier every afternoon, and Sophie would sing while he listened. Between songs, they would talk about everything and nothing. She told him about her dreams of recording an album someday, about the children's hospital where she volunteered to sing for sick kids every Sunday morning. He told her about his company, about the pressure of running a business that employed thousands of people, about how he had lost himself somewhere. Along the way to success, Sophie never treated him differently when she learned the full extent of his wealth. She did not ask for anything or change the way she spoke to him. In fact, she seemed more interested in the James, who loved classic literature and had once dreamed of being a teacher, than in the billionaire who appeared on magazine covers. This was intoxicating to James, who had grown accustomed to people wanting something from him. One Thursday afternoon, as Sophie finished singing a particularly moving ballad about second chances, James made a decision. "Sophie, would you have dinner with me tonight? A real dinner, not just tea and conversation on this bench." Sophie hesitated, her fingers still resting on the guitar strings. "James, I need to be honest with you about something. I don't fit into your world. I live in a tiny apartment. I sing for tips, and I shop at thrift stores. If this is going somewhere, you need to know that I'm never going to be the kind of woman who attends fancy galas or wears designer dresses." And James reached across the space between them and took her hand. "Sophie, I don't want you to fit into my world. I want to find a new world that fits both of us. Please, just dinner. Nothing fancy, I promise." There's a small Italian place in Venice Beach that Emma used to love. They make the best lasagna you've ever tasted, and nobody there cares who I am." Sophie looked into his eyes and saw such vulnerability there that her defenses melted. "Okay," she said softly. "Yes, I'd love to have dinner with you." That evening at Mama Rosa's Italian kitchen, surrounded by checkered tablecloths and the scent of garlic bread, James and Sophie shared their first real date. They laughed more than James had laughed in years. Sophie told him embarrassing stories about her first open mic performances, and James admitted that he had once accidentally sent a text meant for his sister to his entire board of directors. The walls between them continued to dissolve, and by the time they shared a slice of tiramisu, James knew with absolute certainty that he was falling in love with her. 2 weeks later, Sophie performed at a charity event for homeless youth at a community center in downtown Los Angeles. James sat in the back row, watching her command the stage with nothing but her voice and guitar. The audience was completely captivated, and he felt an overwhelming pride mixed with something deeper. After the performance, a music producer approached Sophie with a business card, expressing interest in her work. On the drive back to her apartment, Sophie was quiet. "What's wrong?" James asked, sensing her conflict. "That producer offered to set up a meeting," Sophie said. "He thinks I could make it in the Christian music industry. But James, I'm afraid. What if I get caught up in that world and lose the reason I sing in the first place? What if it becomes about fame and money instead of ministry?" James pulled the car over and turned to face her. "Sophie, talent like yours is a gift that deserves to be shared with more than just the people who walk past the pier. I'm not saying you have to take every opportunity that comes your way, but don't let fear keep you from exploring what God might have planned for you." "You're right," Sophie admitted. "I just wish my mom was here to tell me what to do. She'd tell you to trust yourself," James said gently, "and she'd tell you that you don't have to walk this path alone." Their relationship deepened over the following months. James introduced Sophie to his closest friends. She brought him to her church, where he found himself genuinely moved by the worship and community. He had not been inside a church since his parents' funeral. But with Sophie beside him, singing with her whole heart, he felt something stirring in his own soul. Maybe faith was not about having all the answers. Maybe it was about being willing to trust in something bigger than yourself. In November, Sophie agreed to perform at a 3-day outdoor festival for a children's hospital fundraiser. The weather forecast predicted rain, but she was determined to keep her commitment. James begged her to at least wear a jacket, but Sophie insisted that her dress was fine, and that she would be moving around enough to stay warm. The rain started during the second day of the festival and did not stop. Sophie performed in the downpour for over 4 hours, refusing to leave the stage because she knew the children inside the hospital were watching on monitors. James stood in the rain beside the stage, holding an umbrella that Sophie would not use. Watching her give everything she had to bring joy to suffering children, by that evening, Sophie was shivering uncontrollably. James drove her home and insisted she take a hot shower and rest. But by midnight, she was burning with fever. James, who had stayed on her couch despite her roommate's curious looks, called an ambulance when her temperature spiked to dangerous levels. At the hospital, doctors diagnosed severe pneumonia. They admitted her immediately, and James refused to leave her side. For 3 days, he sat in that uncomfortable hospital chair, watching her struggle to breathe, watching machines monitor her vital signs, and praying prayers that came from a rusty faith being polished new again. On the 4th morning, Sophie's fever finally broke. James was dozing in the chair, his hand still holding hers, when he felt her fingers squeeze gently. His eyes flew open to find her looking at him with tired but clear eyes. "You stayed," she whispered through the oxygen mask. "Of course I stayed," James said, tears streaming down his face. "Sophie, I love you. I'm completely, utterly in love with you. When I thought I might lose you, I realized that you've become the most important person in my life." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too, James. I think I have since that first day when you stood there crying while I sang. I felt something shift in my heart, like God was saying, this one matters." James leaned forward and kissed her forehead gently. "When you get out of here, I want to do this right. I want to meet your friends properly, take you on real dates, build something real with you." "I'd like that," Sophie said with a weak smile. But James, I need you to understand something. I'm not going to stop singing on the street or volunteering at the hospital or living simply. That's who I am. No, James replied. And I love exactly who you are. I don't want to change you, Sophie. I want to support you in being more fully yourself. Sophie spent another week in the hospital recovering. During that time, James barely left her side. He read to her from her favorite books, played music on his phone, and told her stories about Emma that he had never shared with anyone else. Sophie, in turn, shared her own stories about her mother, about the lessons she had learned, about the dreams she still carried, the day Sophie was released from the hospital. James drove her not to her apartment, but to his Malibu beach house. I want you to stay here while you recover, he said. You'll have your own room, complete privacy, and I've hired a nurse to check on you twice a day. Please, let me take care of you the way you've been taking care of my heart. Sophie looked at the beautiful house overlooking the ocean and then at James, whose eyes held such hope and love. Okay, she agreed, but only until I'm fully recovered. That evening, as they sat on the deck watching the sunset, James suddenly got down on one knee. Sophie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Sophie Starling, James began, his voice shaking with emotion. I know this is fast. I know we've only known each other for a few months. But when I almost lost you, I realized that life is too short to wait for the perfect moment. You walked into my life when I was drowning in grief, and you gave me a reason to believe in hope again. You taught me how to pray, how to laugh, how to feel. Will you marry me? He pulled out a simple but elegant ring, a single diamond on a platinum band. It was beautiful without being ostentatious. Perfect for Sophie's taste. Sophie was crying now, happy tears streaming down her face. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, James, I'll marry you. You've given me something I thought I'd lost when my mom died. Someone who sees me, really sees me, and loves what they see. James slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her properly for the first time. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant colors, two broken hearts began to beat as one. The wedding took place on a warm Saturday morning in March, 6 months after James had proposed. They chose a small stretch of private beach in Malibu, the same beach where James had proposed, where they had spent countless evenings talking about their future. Sophie had insisted on keeping everything simple and intimate, and James had happily agreed. This day was about their love and their commitment to each other, not about impressing anyone or making a social statement. Sophie wore a flowing white dress that she had found at a vintage boutique in Silver Lake. It was simple and elegant, with delicate lace sleeves and a skirt that moved beautifully in the ocean breeze. Her auburn hair was loosely curled and adorned with fresh white roses. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers that reminded her of the ones her mother used to pick during their weekend walks. James wore a light gray suit with no tie, his shirt open at the collar, looking relaxed and genuinely happy in a way his business associates would hardly recognize. The guest list included only 50 people, Sophie's closest friends from church and the music community, her roommates who had become like sisters, the families from the children's hospital where she volunteered, Mama Rosa from the Italian restaurant, and even a few regular visitors from the pier who had watched their love story unfold. From James's side, there were his key executives who had become friends over the years. His college roommate who had flown in from New York, and Patricia, his assistant, who had watched him transform from a grief-stricken workaholic into a man who knew how to live. The ceremony was officiated by Pastor Michael from Sophie's church, a kind man in his 60s, who had counseled them through their engagement. He spoke about how God brings people together in unexpected ways, how sometimes the darkest moments in our lives lead us to the brightest blessings. Sophie cried through most of the ceremony, and James was not much better. Both of them overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them to this moment. When it came time for vows, Sophie went first. James, when I met you, you were a man carrying the weight of unbearable loss. I was just singing songs on a pier, trying to keep a promise to my mother. I never imagined that God would use my voice to heal your heart, and I definitely never imagined that you would heal mine in return. She paused, wiping tears from her cheeks. You've shown me that it's okay to dream bigger than I ever thought possible, that accepting help isn't weakness, but wisdom. You've supported every part of who I am without trying to change me. I promise to love you through every season, to be your partner in all things, and to remind you every day that you are so much more than your success. You are kind, generous, and the best man I've ever known. James's hands trembled as he began his vows. Sophie, before I met you, I was successful by every worldly measure, but I was empty inside. I had lost my faith, my joy, and my purpose. Then I heard you singing about hope, and something in me woke up. You didn't see a billionaire or a CEO. You saw James, just James, and you loved that person. His voice broke with emotion. You've taught me how to pray again, how to laugh again, how to believe that tomorrow can be better than today. I promise to protect your dreams as fiercely as I protect my own, to never let the world change who you are, and to spend every day of my life making sure you know how precious you are. You are my answered prayer, my second chance, my home. When Pastor Michael pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in applause and cheers. James kissed Sophie as the ocean waves crashed behind them, and in that moment, both of them felt the presence of the loved ones they had lost. As if Emma and Sophie's mother were there celebrating with them, the reception was held right there on the beach. With string lights hung between posts, long tables covered in white linens, and simple but delicious food from Mama Rosa's restaurant. Instead of a DJ, Sophie's musician friends formed an impromptu band, playing everything from worship songs to classic love ballads. As the sun began to set, Sophie picked up her guitar and sang a new song she had written specifically for this day, titled "Two Broken Pieces Made Whole." There was not a dry eye in the gathering. After the wedding, James and Sophie did not immediately jet off to some exotic honeymoon destination. Instead, they spent a quiet week at the beach house, cooking together, taking long walks on the shore, and simply enjoying being married. Sophie continued to sing at the pier twice a week because, as she explained to James, that was where their story had begun, and she never wanted to forget her roots. 3 months into their marriage, Sophie received a call from the music producer who had approached her after the charity performance. He had been following her journey and wanted to offer her a recording contract with a respected Christian music label. This time, with James's encouragement and Pastor Michael's guidance, Sophie felt ready to explore the opportunity. They met with the producer, a genuine man named Robert Chen, who shared Sophie's faith and understood her desire to stay true to her calling. "I don't want to make you into something you're not," Robert explained. "I want to help you reach more people with the gift God gave you. Your authenticity is what makes you special." Over the next 6 months, Sophie worked on her first album. James converted one of the rooms in their beach house into a home studio where she could write and practice. He sat in on recording sessions, offering support, but never trying to control the creative process. The album, titled Songs from the Pier, included the song she had been singing the day they met, "The Man Who Found Hope," which was her completed version of the song about James, and 11 other original compositions. When the album released in September, it exceeded everyone's expectations. It climbed to number 3 on the Christian music charts and received widespread acclaim for its raw honesty and beautiful melodies. Sophie began receiving invitations to perform at churches, conferences, and festivals across the country. James restructured his role at Montgomery Technologies, promoting his chief operating officer to handle day-to-day operations so he could travel with Sophie and support her growing ministry. They traveled together for the next year, and Sophie's influence grew steadily. She never forgot where she came from, though. In every city they visited, she would find a local park or public space and do a free concert. Just like her days at the Santa Monica Pier, she visited children's hospitals, sang at homeless shelters, and made time for anyone who wanted to share their story with her. James discovered a new purpose in using his resources to amplify Sophie's impact. He established the Emma Grace Foundation in memory of his sister, funding music therapy programs in hospitals and supporting young artists who wanted to use their talents for ministry. Working alongside Sophie, he found more fulfillment than he ever had in the tech industry. One evening in December, almost 2 years after they had met, Sophie and James were preparing for a concert at a large church in Austin, Texas. Sophie had been feeling tired and slightly nauseous for a few weeks, and James had been worried. That afternoon, she finally agreed to see a doctor. When Sophie emerged from the examination room, her eyes were shining with tears, but she was smiling. James jumped up from his chair in the waiting room, his heart racing. "What is it? Are you okay?" Sophie took his hands in hers. "James, I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." James felt the world tilt on its axis in the best possible way. He pulled Sophie into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby," he kept repeating. "We're going to have a baby." That night during the concert, Sophie made the announcement to the audience. "Before I sing my next song, I want to share some news. My husband and I just found out today that we're expecting our first child." The church erupted in applause and cheers. This baby is such a gift, such a reminder that God is always writing new chapters in our stories. My mother used to say that every child is a promise from heaven, and I finally understand what she meant. She sang a tender song about new beginnings, and there was not a person in that church who was not moved by the moment. James stood in the wings, watching his wife glow with joy and purpose. He thanked God for the day he had wandered to that pier in his darkest hour. The pregnancy progressed beautifully. Sophie continued performing until her 7th month, and then she and James returned to Malibu to prepare for the baby's arrival. They converted the guest room into a nursery, painting it soft yellow and decorating it with musical notes. James read every parenting book he could find. Sophie sang to her growing belly every night. Their daughter was born on a sunny morning in May, exactly 3 years after James and Sophie had first met. They named her Emma Grace Montgomery, honoring both of the women who had shaped their lives so profoundly. She had Sophie's auburn hair and James's blue eyes. And from the moment she entered the world, she was surrounded by love. Sophie took a few months off from touring to bond with Emma Grace, but she continued writing songs. Her second album, Legacy of Love, released when Emma Grace was 6 months old, and it became even more successful than the first. The title track, about passing faith and hope down through generations, became an anthem in churches across the country. As Emma Grace grew, she became a part of their ministry. Sophie would often bring her on stage during performances, and the sight of mother and daughter together touched hearts everywhere they went. James scaled back his business involvement even further, serving only as chairman of the board at Montgomery Technologies, so he could be present for every milestone in his daughter's life. 5 years after they met, on a warm afternoon in June, James, Sophie, and Emma Grace returned to the Santa Monica Pier. Sophie brought her guitar, and they sat on the same bench where everything had begun. A small crowd gathered as Sophie began to sing, and Emma Grace, now a precocious 4-year-old, stood beside her mother and sang along in her sweet, high-voiced. James watched his wife and daughter, overwhelmed with gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. He thought about the broken man he had been, stumbling onto this pier with a shattered heart, and he marveled at the grace that had transformed his life. He thought about Emma, his sister, and felt certain that she would have loved Sophie and been the most amazing aunt to little Emma Grace. When Sophie finished singing, she looked at James with those same warm, understanding eyes that had captivated him from the first moment. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I'm thinking about how God answers prayers in ways we never expect," James said, pulling both his girls into his arms. "I came here looking for a reason to keep living, and I found everything I never knew I needed." Ow. Sophie kissed him softly. "We found each other," she corrected, "and together, we found our way home." Little Emma Grace tugged on her father's shirt. "Daddy, can we come back here next week? I want to sing for the people like Mommy does." James and Sophie exchanged a glance, both smiling. "Yes, sweetheart," Sophie said. "We can come back any time you want. This is a very special place for our family." As the sun began to set over the Pacific Ocean, the small family sat together on that bench, listening to the waves and watching the carousel spin. Tourists walked by, children laughed, and seagulls called overhead. It was an ordinary moment in an extraordinary life, a life built on faith, love, and the healing power of music. Sophie had kept her promise to her mother, using her voice to bless others. James had found his way back to faith and discovered a purpose bigger than business success. And Emma Grace was growing up surrounded by love, learning from her parents that the greatest gifts in life cannot be bought, only received with gratitude and shared with joy. Their story, which had begun with a sad millionaire and a singing woman on a pier, had become a testament to hope, to second chances, and to the beautiful way that God weaves broken threads into tapestries of grace. And this was not the ending, but rather the beginning of many more chapters yet to be written, many more songs yet to be sung, many more lives yet to be touched by the love that had changed everything between them. The music that had brought them together continued to flow through their lives, a constant reminder that even in our darkest moments, there is always a song of hope waiting to be heard. We just have to be willing to stop and listen. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to click like, share this story with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more meaningful stories.